And what I've noticed in this last year with reconnecting to authenticity in a way that I haven't experienced before, what it feels like is if you kind of picture the mind or even like the soul or the spirit as like this vast universe, and how when we're in the judgment cycle, what we've basically done is banished certain corners of that universe, right? We've banished certain planets where we've said, no, that's untouchable. I'm not allowed to go there. I'm not allowed to think about that or experience that or want that or examine and explore that. And so if you think about the creative process, if half of your universe has been banished or is off limits to you, well, then you only have access to that which has been like culturally approved, right?
Welcome to the Healthy, Wealthy, Wise Artist podcast, where artists of all kinds come to fuel their passion, sharpen their skills, and thrive in their creative lives. I'm your host, Lara Bianca-Pilcher, life and creativity coach and fellow artist, here to support you on your artistic journey. Whether you're a performer, writer, visual artist, or any kind of artist, this is the space for real talk, practical advice, and inspiring stories. Subscribe and join us each week for more inspiration and actionable insights to fuel your artistry. Let's dive in and get inspired. Artists and creatives live in a world where creative expression is everything. But how do we truly say what we need, what we feel, what we think, and what we believe? And when we don't, when we censor ourselves or mold our voices to fit expectations, what is the cost? Whether that's with a director or whether it's with a castmate or whether it's with your agent or whether it's with a fellow artist. So today I'm talking with Echo, a life coach, writer, speaker, and a gifted teacher who is deeply passionate about connection, mental health, and emotional authenticity. She's been practicing a radical kind of honesty for the last 3 months, saying exactly what she wants, needs, feels, and dreams, even when it's scary. And she's sharing what she's learned about truth-telling, relationships, and why the pain of honesty might be just easier to live with than the pain of inauthenticity. We're living in a world where people are craving the authentic. They want to get to know you as an artist, your process, as well as your work. If you've ever struggled with self-censorship, whether it's in your art, your relationships, or your own inner dialogue, this episode is for you. Hello, Echo. Welcome to the podcast. I was really struck by your post on social media where you talked about the practice of saying exactly what you want, need, feel, and think. First of all, I was like, wow, that's inspiring. But how did this start for you?
Yeah, great question. So I have been married a really long time. I'm 41. I got married when I was 19. So it's been a learning process. We have always liked each other, cared for each other, loved each other, but there have been some really hard years through those 22 years, and we've learned a lot. And I would say when we first married, partly because we were young, partly because of the communities we were raised in, we really didn't have a lot of good tools or language for how to connect and how to connect authentically. So we had a lot of unconscious core beliefs that we weren't aware of, that we were working from. And some of those unconscious core beliefs had to do with believing certain arbitrary rules that we didn't even know we were following. And then really, really filtering who we were. Because growing up, you kind of learn what's socially acceptable and what is not. Yeah. And whether you're conscious of it or not, that's how you function from there on out until you become aware that that's what you're doing. So we would just both catch each other. I guess it was a long time in, probably 10, 15 years in, where some different pains and disconnects had really added up. And so we were at a point of, okay, we really have to face these head on and deal with them so that we can feel emotionally safe in this relationship, authentic with each other in this relationship. And so one of the things we realized that we were doing, some of the rules that we were following is, so we would have an emotion rise up or a thought or a desire rise up. And rather than share that, rather than express that with anyone, including each other, we would judge it within ourselves, right? So you have an emotion come or a thought or an idea or a desire. And before it ever sees the light of day, you judge it and you stuff it back down, right? Because you decide it's too much, or it's socially unacceptable, or it's not okay that this is who I am, or this is what I want, or this is what I feel. And so we were both experiencing that judgment cycle inside of us, not realizing it, of course, because you're not conscious of it for until
Mm.
you are. And then when you
Yeah.
are, and you decide you want to disrupt that cycle, you can. And that's really been the process especially this last year, but really the last few years of recognizing how often we were doing that. Not out of bad intention, not because we didn't care about each other, but just because that's what we had learned in childhood. And so that's what we continued. So we are trying to
Wow.
disrupt that cycle now and create a truly, a depth of experience and an authenticity with each other that we just haven't experienced before now.
Oh man, that sounds like the most beautiful intimacy and also
Mm,
super, super scary as well. But what made you
absolutely.
realize, like, to shift to that level of honesty? What was the
Mhm.
hardest part at the beginning for you?
Well, there's emotions I have and things that I feel and think and want that cause him pain.
Mm.
And sometimes they're about him. Typically, they're about him, right? So if I
Yeah.
feel I've experienced this with you over the years, it's been really hard for me, or I don't like it, to
Mm.
say that, excuse me, causes him pain. And so to express things that cause the person you care about pain is really hard.
Yeah.
That's been the hardest part. I would say the second hardest part is just feeling shame for who I authentically am, who I am at my core, right? What I
Mm.
feel at my core, what I want at my core. The shame is it's something to reckon with, right? Where
Oh,
that
yeah.
comes up and you're embarrassed. Like, why am I this way? Why can I not be a different way? This image that you have in your head of who you want to be or how you want to be. And really
Mm.
having to reckon with that as well of like, okay, I can pretend to be this other thing or I can just be myself. And either way, there's discomfort, right? Pretending to be
Mm.
something you're not, there's discomfort. Being who you truly are and the shame that accompanies that, I think for everyone, that's my
Yes.
understanding. There's
Yeah.
discomfort there as well. So it's like either way, there's discomfort. So we get to choose which discomfort we
Oh,
experience.
I really like the way you put that. And you mentioned in that post that it felt scary and painful, and you've talked about triggering shame. Can you talk about why does that happen? Why is honesty so vulnerable for
Mm,
us as human beings and for you personally?
yeah. So one of the things I've learned about shame over the last 8 years or so is that shame. Okay, so shame is biological, right? We're born with the mechanisms inside of us that trigger shame, that experience shame. But
Mm.
what we feel shame about is cultural. So you can interview people all over the world and ask them what they experience shame about, and you're going to get different answers because it's informed by our culture, it's informed by
Oh,
our communities, by our families of origin.
yeah.
Um, so it's been a learning experience and it's an opportunity to self reflect, right? So we
Mm.
have a culture that believes certain things. Interestingly, though, much of what we believe as a culture is dehumanizing. It
Yeah.
doesn't work with mental health. It doesn't work with physical health. Like we have these expectations, we have rules that we've created that do uphold certain aspects of society, or they do preserve the institutions within society, but they don't
Mm.
support health. They don't support physical health and they don't support mental health. And so
Mm.
often what I've noticed is that when the shame gets triggered, it's because I'm experiencing something human that is normal and natural and healthy as a human, but it doesn't conform, it doesn't comply with what
Mm.
institutions require in order for them to be preserved, right? So
Yeah.
for example, we could just talk about sleep, right? We need 8-ish hours of sleep every night. That doesn't really work with capitalism. That doesn't
Mm.
really work with productivity. That doesn't really work with I got to get all the things done, right? They are in opposition with each other or of each other.
Yeah.
So, 8 hours of sleep is going to help my mental health. 8 hours of sleep is going to help my physical health. It's not going to help me make more money. I mean, it
Yeah.
is in a sense, like indirectly, it is, right? Because if I'm
Yeah.
doing well, then I can produce, but it's not in terms of the time spent. And so if you slow yourself down and start to notice what you feel shame about, often that is what we feel shame about is, okay, I
Mm.
need this thing in order to thrive physically and mentally and emotionally, but it doesn't preserve the systems that have been created over the last X amount of years,
Wow.
that keep the society functioning the way it's currently functioning.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting to hear you say that because, from a psychological perspective, do you think that we're self censoring in relationships as a default because of that? Or is there something else as well? Like,
Mm,
what's the self censoring like? Like, it seems to be our baseline. Why is that?
right. I think that's definitely part of it. That's been my experience in both
Yeah.
experiencing it personally and just learning about it over the last few years.
Yeah.
Um, there's also an aspect, though, the relationship models we were given were not healthy relationship models.
Mm.
So, not everyone likes this word. It's been a helpful word for me, but learning about codependency has
Yeah.
been actually life saving for me because it's made me realize that I will always well, let's see, what's the word for that? Like defer or say, I don't need what I need. I'll just focus on what you need. And it sounds really nice on paper. Like it sounds really sweet and very caring and giving. And you would think that a relationship would thrive if that's the mindset.
Yeah.
But what we have learned over the last 5 years is it actually just led to chronic unmet needs but
Mm.
within both of us. Like what we've learned in our particular relationship is that we were both doing that, right? We both were given a codependency model. We both were following a codependency model. And so we were both following rules that we didn't know we were following. And we were both, dealing with chronic unmet needs and chronic unprocessed emotion but out of goodness, like out of care for the other person, right? Out of good
Mm.
intentions, out of,
Yeah.
well, it's so you are important to me and caring for you is important to me. And therefore, if my body needs to suffer for you, I will suffer for you, except that we didn't know we were doing it, right?
Wow.
We weren't aware of it, we weren't conscious of it. And so both of us had declining health, both of us had chronic symptoms, not
Yeah.
realizing that that was a big part of it was that just chronic unmet needs, chronic unprocessed emotion leads to all those things. It leads to
Mm.
poor mental health. It leads to poor physical health. And we were both doing that for each other because we care for each other, not realizing that there was another model. And
Mm.
that's why I want to talk about this, right? Because there
Yes.
is another way. There is another way
Yeah.
that says I hold you and your needs in my hands and I hold me and my needs in my hands. And I am big enough for both. I can do both. I can be aware of you and I can care for you and I can still be a human and I can still say what I need, say what I want, and then take the time and the energy to meet those needs and to go after what I
Wow.
want.
Wow, I so love what you're saying about that. And how does this kind of truth telling change the way that we experience emotions like
Mm,
shame or fear? And you said that you prefer the pain of honesty over the pain of inauthenticity. Can you break that down? What does
yes.
it
Yes.
do? Like the pain of inauthenticity, what does it
Mm,
actually look like when it comes to those emotions like shame and fear?
yeah. So for one, that's kind of where it started was reconnecting to emotion. And that was many years ago, learning through connection codes, right? I think you're familiar with. Just understanding the science behind emotions, the understanding the biology of emotions really helped me to reconnect what I would say was first with my emotions, which then led to reconnecting with my body. That took a few more years. So I started to tune in. Like I can still remember the first day where I got flooded with emotion. And it was the first time to go, oh, that's emotion, right? Like, of course, I had been experiencing that my whole life, but I didn't have that awareness. So all I knew was I feel itchy. I feel uncomfortable. I feel overwhelmed. Like, I want to either curl into a ball or I want to run away or I want to yell, but I don't know why and I don't know what's happening. And so the first time after I started to learn about emotion and the biology of emotion and what's happening in the body with emotion, I was in the car, I was alone, and what triggered it was a thought. It was a memory. It wasn't even anything that was happening around me. So a memory flooded my mind, and then the memory of that, of what had happened, flooded my body with emotion. And because I had the awareness, it was like, oh, that's what's happening. And because I know that that's what's happening, I can partner with it differently. I can show up for it differently. So that was several years of a re-education, and then through that began to realize how often I resist my own body, right? Where I just resist my literally like just the physical needs. I need to rest. Oh, I can't do that. I have too many other things that are important. Or I'm thirsty. Oh, yeah, but I'm in the middle of this task or I'm caring for another person. So I'm not going to go get, I can wait. I can wait. I can
Mm.
wait. I can wait. Right. Like that was the cycle that I'd been in, especially as a mom. I became a mom at 21, had my daughter at 21. So my whole adult life has been caring for my children. And it's so easy to fall into that cycle. And so when we begin to reconnect with our bodies and we recognize I've been neglecting those basic physical needs most of my life, So there is no longer safety within my body, because think about it. If you were doing the same thing for someone you love, like take your kids, for example, where they say, Mom, I'm thirsty. And your response is always, you're just going to have to wait. You're just going to have to wait as long as possible until you're so desperate that it's all you can think about. How much safety would there be between you and your child, right? If that was your response to every physical need they brought to you. Well, we do the same thing with ourselves in our own bodies. So we lose that connection, we lose that safety within our bodies. And so our bodies, they're trying to be heard, right? They have to be heard. It's the only way to survive and thrive, is for our bodies to be heard. But we've ignored them for so long and neglected them for so long that they've lost trust with us. And so the communication cycle is broken down.
When we hold back our truth, and you've spoken a little
Mm.
about this, it does affect our mental health and it affects our relationships. But what has that looked like for you in terms of changing that mental health conversation within yourself when you
Yeah.
started to speak out? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind when you say that, I've gone through some trauma-informed training that has just taught me how the brain and body communicate with each other,
Yeah.
and how each can support the other, right? And so one of the things that happens when we are resisting our own experience, so our own mind, our own emotions, is that we are holding our bodies in tension, like literally trying to not move, not exist, right? And that shows up in the muscle, in the joints, in the fascia, in the tendons.
Wow.
And so for me, many years through an unconscious process of resisting my own existence, resisting my
Yeah.
own emotions, my own desires, my own ideas and dreams,
Yeah.
I had chronic pain, right? For years and years and years, starting in my 20s, and now I'm 41. So years and years and years of chronic pain in different parts of my body. And once I began learning about trauma and emotions and how the brain and body work together, started to
Mm.
recognize that, oh, I hold myself in tension as though it's two things really. It's trying to keep myself from existing, right? It's trying to keep myself from moving, like stay and
Mm.
freeze is a lot of what it is.
Yeah.
Um, just again through the unconscious process of, I have an idea, I have a desire, I have a physical need, I have an emotion. Oh, I judge those. I judge them. I
Mm.
stay frozen. Don't do the thing. Don't go get the glass of water. Don't
Yeah.
go get the glass of water. And so to think about what it takes to keep the body from going to get that glass of water, right? So often
Mm.
that manifests as chronic pain, which can also be chronic illness. And so in these last few years of reconnecting to my body, reconnecting to my emotion, and
Mm.
learning how to support both, learning how to partner with both, with compassion rather than judgment, and then
Mm.
meet the needs, the literal, and some of them are more complex. Like, for example, I'm back in school, I'm pursuing a dream, right? That's way
Mm.
more complex than I need to go get a glass of water, right?
Yes.
But it's the same internal process of, oh, I exist authentically. I can say what I want and what I need authentically, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. So,
Wow.
some of those decisions are more complex. Some of them are very simple. Just go get the glass of water. But either
Mm.
way, your option is to constrict, right? Contract, keep myself from going to get that glass of water, or allow the flow and the movement for my body to speak and say, I need water. And then my muscles and bones to work together
Mm.
to go get that glass of water. So one of the ways that has changed for me is that it's addressing my chronic pain. I'm not experiencing the chronic pain. Like I've had a chronic shoulder injury. Goodness gracious. I keep
Yeah.
getting caught up in my words. I have
Yeah.
had a chronic shoulder injury that
Mm.
has not flared up these last few years, even though I'm still very, very active. Like typically the more active I was, the more it would flare up. And it has not flared up these last few years. And I have to believe it's connected. It only makes sense to me
Mm.
that it's connected, that I'm allowing my body to move. I'm allowing my life to move. And so I'm not holding my shoulders and my back and my neck in such tension all day, every day, resisting my own
Mm.
experience. The other way that has really affected for me or been affected for me, have also dealt with chronic depression.
Mm.
And when I look back now, I see that so much of that was a feeling of powerlessness, a feeling of helplessness. And so it was my beautiful, brilliant body trying to protect me from living in this powerless cycle, right? And so it was like a way for my body to go into it's super complicated. I don't know if we have time to go into all of it, but basically my body was
Yeah.
trying to protect me from those feelings of powerlessness. And so that would
Wow.
often show up for me as depression, where just kind of
Mm.
a lack of motivation, a lack of dreaming, right? Like just kind of getting into a real small space and just being okay existing in that smaller space. And so in these last few years, again, reconnecting with desire, reconnecting with emotion, and
Mm.
recognizing I actually do have agency. I have far more agency than I
Wow.
believed that I did. And so
Mm.
that depression doesn't need to come rescue me anymore, right? It doesn't need to come protect me anymore, because the beliefs, the neural pathways have changed in my brain to say, if you have an emotion, you can express it. If you have a need, you can meet it. If you have a dream, you can go after it. And so I don't need that depression to protect me and keep me safe the way that I did through my
Mm.
20s and a lot of my 30s.
That's so interesting, and I've not heard that take on it. It's fascinating to me. What do you think happens? Because it's quite common with artists where
Mm.
they've given themselves permission to go for a dream,
Mm-hmm.
so they've given themselves that agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this, you can apply this to many professions, but on the way there, the world is not giving them permission. So the world is what's stopping, maybe because it's saturated market, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and all the
Yeah.
opportunities aren't aligning with their dream, and the depression comes. What do you think that
Mm.
depression is? Is it
Yeah.
similar when they are allowing themselves, or do you think there's a bigger story going on? I mean,
Mm.
that's a complicated question, but what's your
Very.
thoughts on
It
it?
is. Well, the very first thought that came to mind is that you would be experiencing disappointment and grief.
Mm,
So if you're going after something and feeling like you can't have what you want, not because you haven't given yourself permission, but because
mm,
there's not opportunity or there's not connection in some
yeah,
way, I
yeah,
would imagine that there is a grief, and then you would have to go through the grief process to
right.
acknowledge the full range of experience, right? Of I
Mm,
have this dream and the things that I want to happen aren't happening either at all, or not as easily as I'd hoped, or not as quickly as I had hoped. And so
mm,
again, it's that same experience of holding it all and allowing it all, right?
mm,
Following our own energy. That's what we talk about in connection codes, is following the
mm.
energy, right? So it's just energy. Emotion is just energy. So when that emotion releases in our brain and then floods our body, it's just noticing it, it's
Mm,
holding it, it's witnessing it, it's responding to it with compassion rather than judgment. And
yeah.
and so much healing happens when we do that for ourselves and when we do that for each other. If we
Oh,
can be in a
wow.
relationship where we are just witnessed, and that's a lot of what my spouse and I are
Mm,
experiencing right now,
yeah.
shifting into from the judgment cycle to a compassionate cycle. And a lot of that compassion is literally just witnessing, where he can
Mm,
say what he's experiencing and I don't have to judge it. I don't have to react to it. I don't even have to do anything about it. Even if it's
yeah.
about me, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to do anything about it. Just through
Mm,
witnessing it, the emotion is allowed to flow, the energy is allowed to flow. And that in and of itself has power. It's transformative power.
I love that you say that, because I think what happens is we feel shame, like we judge ourselves for not measuring up to the goal. Somehow
Yes.
it turns inward, and it becomes like toxic inward, because we
Yes.
think something in us isn't right, something in me isn't enough, something is. And then, like, you spiral into that depression. Like, that's my sort of two bobs worth on that
Yeah.
space. But
Yeah.
have you noticed shifts in the body and the energy, and even your own creativity, practicing
Mhm.
that honesty to get
Oh
you out
my
of
word.
those spirals of depression? Yeah.
So much energy creativity, so much
Oh,
creativity.
wow, that's
It's
exciting.
been very exciting actually. I've been a writer pretty much my whole life, like since I learned to read and write. Have always had stories flow from me, but that definitely,
Wow.
there's an ebb and flow to it, right? Depending on what season that I'm in. And
Yeah.
what I've noticed in this last year with reconnecting to authenticity in a way that I haven't experienced before, what it feels like is, if you kind of picture the mind or even like the soul or the spirit as like this vast universe, and how when we're in the judgment cycle, what we've basically done is banished certain corners of that universe, right? We've banished
Mm,
certain planets where we've said, no, that's untouchable. I'm not allowed to go there. I'm not allowed to think about that or experience that or
mm,
want that or examine and explore that. And so if you think about the creative process, if half of your universe has been banished or is off limits to you, well, then you only have access to that which has been what, like culturally approved, right?
Yes.
Whereas if we are giving ourselves permission to exist as artists or as humans and go, oh, well, that planet looks really interesting. I'm curious about that part of fill in the blank. I'm curious about that part of me, or I'm curious about
Yeah.
that part of history, or I'm curious about that part of society. And then we're allowed to follow that curiosity. Imagine the amount of creative energy that is produced from that,
Oh
or that
my
is just
gosh.
allowed to flow
It's
from that,
freaking
right?
exciting. Wow, Echo. Like
Super
that is
exciting.
incredible.
Super
And I love
exciting.
that you shared that about writing and like this abundance of creativity that
Oh,
that comes.
oh,
Like
yeah.
so
If
exciting.
anything, it's like, how will I ever make the time to actually record the ideas or the stories or the characters that come from that energy?
So, I mean, that just makes me feel so alive. So,
Me
artists,
too.
like we were talking about that creative space, we so struggle with self-censorship a lot, whether it's the fear of
Yes,
judgment, imposter syndrome, not wanting to rock the boat. Some people struggle with that more
absolutely.
than others. Do you see parallels between honesty in relationships, honesty in your own life, and in that creativity?
Mm,
For all the artists out there listening,
mm,
like how can they start to tune in to what's really going on in their creativity and their artistic expression here?
yeah. So, one of the thoughts that comes to mind when I hear you say that is
Mhm.
we assume, or maybe we forget how many humans are in the world, right? So
Mhm.
part of the artistic expression is for ourselves, right? It's that that desire or that compulsion. It's like, well, I just can't not. I have to write, or I have to paint, or I have to dance. I can't
Yes.
not do that. And so some of that is
Yeah.
the self expression, whether there's an audience or not. I have to move in that way. But the
Mm.
other side of it is connection, right? It's connecting to a community who appreciates the art, who
Mm.
understands or at least is curious about the art. And so I
Yeah.
know for me, whenever I forget how many humans are in the world and I think, well, this small sample size that I experienced at one point in my life that created some of these judgment cycles
Mm.
means that if I bring this art to life or to the light, that it will be judged in the way that the people who don't understand it judged it, or the
Mm.
people who aren't curious about it judged it,
Yeah.
instead of recognizing and embracing that people need to hear your story. People need to
Mm.
hear your art. People need to hear your ideas. And maybe one group won't be curious about it and will judge it and won't understand it. But another group, it's exactly what they need and want today.
Mm.
And so we want to write for that group, right? We want to write for the group who needs to hear your story, who
Wow.
needs to see your art, and to kind of hold that, whether it's someone's face, like you might have someone in your life where you go, I'm writing for that one person. And
Mm.
just for that one person. And obviously other people will hear your art or see your art as well.
Mm.
But if you can hold that one person in your mind and know if this is a good thing or a connection between me and that one person, it's enough. That's
Mm.
enough. It's enough
Yeah.
for just me, but that's a lot harder, right? It's enough for
Yeah.
me to write for me,
Yeah.
but that's a much harder sell. Whereas if we can think, okay, that one person needs my words or needs my art, and then we don't have to focus our energy on the people who don't understand it or who aren't curious about it.
I really love that because I heard Brene Brown talk on creativity. You probably have too. And that if we don't give it voice, it actually implodes and turns like toxic within us
Yes,
inside. Like
absolutely.
there's something about it. And I mean, creativity is a lot of things. So obviously, I'm talking in the context of art, but creativity as
Right.
a force is a lot of things. Um, what if an artist is afraid of
Mm,
their own truth? What if they can't be honest
mm,
with themselves?
it's so
What do you
hard.
think? What do you think? What do we do? How do we
Yeah.
get through that? That's
Yeah.
stuck, right? I'm a coach too. Like to me, it's like if you can't own something, your
Mm.
own truth, it's hard to move forward, right?
Oh, it's so hard. And I've absolutely
Mm.
experienced that, like being afraid
Yeah.
of myself, or disapproving of myself. So the first
Mm.
thought that came to mind with that, through learning about trauma and learning about embodiment,
Mm.
is how we can show up for our bodies, because so
Yeah.
much of this is happening in the body. We focus a lot on the mind in our culture, and we have more understanding of the mind than we do of the body. But we
Mm.
desperately need an understanding of the body and how it works, and to be able to show up for that. So the first thought I had was to start a practice where you put both of your hands on your chest,
Mm.
almost as though someone else is holding you, someone else is
Mm.
showing up for you, right?
Yeah.
And so to reparent ourselves in the way that we've always needed, I one of the maybe I what is the word? I can't think of what the word is, not allegory, but basically what I picture in my head is that I have this inner child and she's the
Mm.
one who wants to experience and create. And then
Oh,
I
wow.
have this inner judge who's always resisting her and telling her why her ideas are bad. And then
Mm.
I have this inner parent who is very compassionate, who shows up and says, "You're allowed to speak. You're allowed to show up. You're allowed to create." Right.
Wow.
And so then they kind of take turns being in the driver's seat of my
Mm.
life.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I think about that inner parent, part of what I picture is the embodiment practice of placing your hands. You can do both hands on your chest. You can do one on your chest and one on your belly. But just as a way for that inner parent to show up for
Yeah.
that inner child and say,
Yes.
you are
Yeah.
allowed and you are always allowed. And I see your fear and I
Mm.
hold your fear. I witness your fear and your fear is safe here too. It's
Mm.
allowed to exist too. And you're allowed to move forward and express while you're afraid. You're allowed to do it while you're scared, right? We're allowed to move scared. We're allowed to create
Mm.
scared. And so much of it is just compassion. It's just having that inner compassion. And of course, if we can experience that in a relationship as well,
Mm.
it's that much more powerful. If we can have someone in our life, even literally one person, and whether that's a friend or family or a professional, a coach or a
Mm.
therapist, if we can have one person who can bring that witnessing to us, that can model the compassion, can
Mm.
model the curiosity, can model the safety, we can relearn. It's like lifting weights, right? If you haven't
Mm.
been lifting weights, your muscles atrophy.
Yes,
If
that's
you
true.
have not been treating yourself with compassion, then your compassion muscles atrophy. And most
Mm.
of us have atrophied compassion muscles. And so if we can
Mm.
have one relationship that shows up with compassion and safety, we can begin to learn from that relationship and we can do that for ourselves. And then of course it spreads because then we learn how to treat other people that way as well. So we can
Oh my
change our
gosh.
communities.
Wow, your answer's so deep and so profound,
Mm,
and like there's a wider conversation on creativity and artistic life and life in general, really, but that
mm,
that we're not having, particularly as artists, as to what's going on inside of our body, especially around that trauma
yes.
informed space. So I really thank you for that because I think you've given us
Mm,
some really good tools. It's such a powerful conversation. I think
mm,
so many of us, especially artists, grapple with how much truth to share because we don't want to bleed everywhere and
yep,
how much of our
absolutely.
emotion to allow and whether we have even permission to say what we need to say, which I think very much we do.
Mm,
And you've given us so much to think about. And I think not only in our personal lives, but also I think of all the times that we feel silenced. I don't want to go into
yeah.
the whole conversation on Me Too, but there's so much of a silencing culture
Yes.
that has existed, that is changing.
Yes.
Where the power of people has caused someone to feel like they can't speak, they can't have a voice.
Mhm.
So I think it's such a great space for artists to really, this is the beginning of a bigger conversation, really.
Mm.
So where can
Love that.
listeners find you if they want to connect with you, if they
Mm.
want to work with you? Where do we look for Echo?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I actually don't currently have a website, but I have a link tree, and you can find my writing on Substack through my link tree. And you can find my coaching. I do one-on-one coaching. I do some group coaching around. It's just a trauma-informed perspective for
Yeah.
mental health and emotional health and physical health. That's a lot of the work I do. A little bit of parenting coaching as well, because this is so important for our
Huge.
families and our children
Yeah.
and our parents as well. So all of that is linked through Instagram. But if you're not on Instagram, then you can just go to my name, Echo Hill Vetter, link tree, and you can find
Yeah.
all of the links there.
I love that. And of course, it will be in the show notes as well. So thank you
Perfect.
so much, Echo. Also, I just want to
Yes,
ask
thank
you,
you.
what do you like to write? What's your writing passion?
I love poetry. I've written some fiction, but I don't share it. It's all on my computer or in files that are tucked away. Maybe someday that will come to light. So most of what I write is either poetry or just nonfiction. So kind of processing my life, but in a creative nonfiction
I
style.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I didn't know that much about
Oh.
you. Thank you again for being here. And to everyone listening, if this conversation resonated with you, send it to a fellow artist or a friend who needs to hear it. And if you try out this honesty practice in your own life or creative work, let me know how it goes. Find me on social media, lara@biancapilcher.com is my website, or you can find the same address on Instagram or Facebook or Pinterest or Threads, wherever you are. I'm hoping to be there too. LinkedIn, I'm on there as well. So guys, thank you again for listening. And if you want coaching with me, now is a great time. You can book a one-on-one session to help you get unstuck and move forward at my website, or just DM me if that is better for you. Also got some great freebies on my website to help you, free coaching guides and things like that to move your life forward. As always, with you on the journey, friends. Until next week, bye for now.